The man merely took a nap on the bus, but woke up to his horror discovering that the bus, which had been full, now held only him. He thought he had missed his stop, so he stood up in confusion to check. But at that moment, the atmosphere inside the bus felt extremely eerie. Just then, a sudden loud bang startled him, and he immediately prepared to turn on his flashlight to see. But because he was so nervous, he fumbled and his phone fell to the floor. However, as he bent down to pick it up, he unexpectedly discovered a long-haired woman lying under the seat. The man jolted awake from his sleep. It turned out the experience he just had was only a nightmare. His name was Nick. Taking advantage of the holiday, he was heading home to spend time with his family. As he looked around at the lively atmosphere on the bus, he finally felt a sense of relief. Just then, the old woman sitting beside him suddenly started coughing repeatedly. Not only that, but she also emitted a sharp, unpleasant stench, nauseating like the smell of decaying flesh. Nick, sitting next to her, became extremely uncomfortable, but out of politeness, he couldn't ask the old woman to move, so Nick simply looked silently out the window, trying to distract himself. Nick showed an expression of disbelief. He couldn't understand what was going on. But by now, Nick could no longer bear it. He sought help from the bus attendant, Crepey, but she insisted seats had to be occupied according to the tickets. Nick frowned and begged Crepey to think of something. However, at that moment, the old woman suddenly stood up. Seeing this, Crepey immediately warned the old woman the bus was moving fast and urged her to return to her seat quickly, but the old woman remained standing motionless in the aisle. Passengers around also shouted for the old woman to sit down, but she remained unmoved. With no other option, Crepey walked over to persuade her, but unexpectedly, the old woman stretched out her hands and began strangling Crepey's neck. Fortunately, other passengers rushed in to help, and Crepey was finally rescued. Yet before they could figure out what was happening, the old woman suddenly spat out blood, drawing strange looks from all the passengers. Soon after, the old woman collapsed stiffly onto the aisle floor. Although Nick disliked the old woman's foul smell, under these special circumstances, he still stepped forward without hesitation to check on her condition first. A nurse then joined him, but after her examination, it was discovered the old woman had, unfortunately, passed away. Crepey immediately informed the driver someone had died on the bus and told him to pull over right away. Quickly, Nick and other passengers carried the old woman's body off the bus. Nick urged the driver to call an ambulance promptly, suggesting they wait until it took the body before continuing. This caused dissatisfaction among other passengers who complained it would delay them. The driver had no other choice but to try and calm the passengers, asking them to be patient. Still, some passengers kept complaining, even suggesting that Crepey stay behind with the body to wait for the ambulance, while the driver took all the passengers and continued the journey. Crepey strongly resisted this idea. She did not want to stay with the body, and they argued intensely. Suddenly, a little boy sat on the ground crying uncontrollably. After the nurse helped him up, she discovered a large bite mark on the boy's shoulder. The next moment, the bus lights suddenly flickered out, and a scream drew everyone's attention. They then discovered the old woman's body had vanished into thin air. The passengers, now frightened, hurried back onto the bus. The driver and Crepey were also baffled, suspecting the old woman might not have been dead. However, the nurse firmly stated her examination couldn't be wrong. The old woman definitely had no vital signs, which Nick could confirm as he had also checked her pulse and found it had stopped. Then, a female passenger named Gibb stated seriously that perhaps the old woman wasn't human, because while they were on the bus, Gibb had noticed that the woman's reflection did not appear in the window glass. Although the old woman's body was now gone, the foul stench she carried still lingered in the air. The passengers, terrified by the implications, clamored to get back on the bus. Even the driver and Crepey decided not to linger and returned to the vehicle. Since there was no response from the ambulance, the old woman had no luggage, and most importantly, her body was nowhere to be found. Crepey specifically reminded all passengers not to speak about this incident to anyone, advising them to act as if nothing had happened. Crepey then began a headcount before departure. Excluding the old woman, there should be 31 people, but Crepey counted several times and still got 32. This instantly sent chills down her spine, and she immediately turned to notify the driver. The seated passengers realized the old woman's presence might still be on the bus, making everyone's spine tingle with fear. Fortunately, the driver announced they would depart immediately and repeatedly reminded passengers to keep quiet about the old woman. Soon after, the bus set off again, but it hadn't gone far when passengers found their phones had no signal, and the bus lights went out once more, causing instant panic among everyone. Meanwhile, the driver was horrified to see the old woman standing by the roadside. A monk seated at the back also spotted the old woman's figure. He first thought his eyes were playing tricks, but after a second look, confirmed it was her, and immediately pulled the curtain shut.
เอาหลวงพี่ยิ่งมืดๆอยู่จะติดทำไมเนี่ย
When the others looked out the window, the old woman's figure vanished once again. An old man declared that even if it was a ghost, there was nothing to fear, and he would smash her head if she appeared again. Then he told everyone to stay quiet. But not long after, continuous coughing suddenly started coming from the back of the bus and no one dared to go check. Eventually, they turned their blame towards Nick, believing it was his constant demands to change seats that angered the old woman and caused all of this. So he must be held responsible for everyone present. Nick had no choice but to slowly make his way towards the back to investigate. Though inwardly panicked, the passengers were still very curious, one by one turning their heads to look back. But when Nick opened the toilet door, he found it completely empty.
ทุกคนมันก็เสียงลมโอ้ยมันก็เสียงลมที่ตีเข้ามาไม่เห็นมีอะไรเลย
A short while later, Nick reappeared before everyone completely unharmed, rushing frantically towards the front. Moy kept staring toward the back. Sensing something was off, and immediately ran to the front as well. The others saw this and began fleeing too, unwilling to remain in their seats. But just as one passenger stood up, he suddenly felt tightness in his chest and then instantly collapsed onto the aisle, throwing the bus into chaos. The monk quickly began chanting sutras and praying. Then that old man started boasting again.
จะกลัวอะไรกันถ้าผีไอ้แก่ผมไม่แกล้งอ่ะเรากันกี่คน30 กว่าคนรุมกระทืบมันดิกลัวอะไรทนไม่ไหวไอ้เหี้ย
The monk standing at the very front was grabbed by the old woman and pulled into the toilet. The next second, a large amount of blood flowed out from under the door. At that moment, everyone realized the old woman's ghost was on the bus, and they all desperately tried to push forward. Immediately afterwards, red handprints began appearing one by one all over the bus. A heavy-set woman used her physical advantage to push her way to the very front. She wanted to open the driver's cabin door to be with the driver, but what she never expected was that the driver had already turned into a cold corpse. Seeing this, she didn't dare stay in the bus either, and ultimately opened the door without hesitation and jumped out. The inside of the bus was now utter pandemonium. A woman trying to force her way into the driver's cabin accidentally got her head stuck in the door. She saw the ghost with her own eyes before she died. Seeing the woman who had died so tragically, they once again fell into a state of panic. Meanwhile, the old man tried to please the ghost by killing someone and offering them as a sacrifice. He believed that if the ghost was satisfied, she might spare his life. The old man's selfish act provoked public outrage. A young man directly confronted him, but unfortunately unarmed, he was beaten to death by the old man. At this point, with no driver, the bus swerved off course, causing everyone to lose their balance and fall. When they got back up, the young man actually stood up again. It turned out the old woman's ghost had possessed the young man. Seeing the ghost firsthand instantly extinguished the old man's previous arrogance. The next second, the old woman controlled the old man's arm. forcing him to beat himself to death. A few others, not daring to stay on the bus, chose to jump out. The remaining people inside the bus kept screaming. Then one passenger grabbed the bus's rooster and ran out. Unexpectedly, the next second, the chicken became the old woman's midnight snack, and after eating her fill, the old woman vanished once more. The bus instantly fell silent, everyone immersed in panic, not knowing what to do. Unwilling to be slaughtered by the ghost any longer, Nick stood up to go to the driver's cabin but ran headlong into the old woman. Nick was overcome by the old woman's stench and passed out. Yet the others couldn't see this happening at all. When he woke up again, the old woman had disappeared without a trace. Nick could take no more. He mustered all his strength and finally managed to open the driver's cabin door, pushed the driver aside, and took the wheel himself. However, Nick had no idea of the route. He could only drive straight ahead along the road. But suddenly, a figure appeared on the windshield, forcing Nick to slam on the brakes. The bus unfortunately crashed into the woods. When he regained consciousness, he struggled to get up and then searched the woods for traces of the others. Suddenly he tripped and fell to the ground, only to discover multiple bodies lying there. Nick got up again to check if there were any survivors. Then he noticed Gibbs sitting to the side, crying. Eventually, they left the forest together on foot, and the old woman remained on that bus. The next day, police reported on the accident, stating all passengers on the bus had perished, no survivors. And that concludes the entire story of the 2025 Thai horror film, VIP Death Seat. Alright, that's all for today's share. Thank you all for watching. See you in the next video.